This story is about a moment that unfolded in the sterile, air-conditioned silence of a corporate boardroom. It concerns a man who was seen as little more than a fixture of the building, and a CEO whose confidence bordered on arrogance. We will explore the surprising intersection of their worlds, where a simple question meant to belittle instead unlocked a hidden universe of experience, leaving an entire room of powerful executives completely speechless. The relevance of this narrative lies in its universal theme, the profound gap between perception and reality. In our daily lives, we often make snap judgments based on appearance, job titles, or perceived status. This story serves as a powerful reminder that an individual's true worth and capabilities are frequently hidden beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to be revealed, challenging our most fundamental assumptions about the people we think we know. Throughout this account, we will meticulously reconstruct the events of that fateful afternoon. We will delve into the characters involved, the corporate culture that set the stage, and the precise sequence of actions that led to the stunning climax. The narrative will follow the challenge, the unexpected response, and the immediate seismic fallout that changed the company's trajectory forever. No embellishments are needed. The truth of the event is compelling enough. Our channel is dedicated to finding and sharing these moments of profound human experience. We spend countless hours researching accounts that highlight incredible, often overlooked aspects of life. Our purpose is to present these stories with the respect and detail they deserve, allowing the power of the events themselves to resonate with you. We believe that stories like this one provide more than just entertainment. They offer genuine insight. The setting for our story is crucial to understanding the dynamics at play. It was the 40th floor conference room of Vance Global, a company known for its aggressive market strategies and its equally demanding CEO. The room itself was a monument to power, with a long mahogany table and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. It was a place where careers were made or broken on a single word. Arthur Vance was the architect of this empire, a man forged in the crucible of corporate warfare. He was sharp, impeccably dressed, and possessed a mind that saw people as assets or liabilities on a balance sheet. His leadership style was effective but cold, valuing results above all else. He believed he knew everything about his company, from the highest executive to the lowest-ranking employee, or so he thought. He had a particular disdain for anything that wasted his time. Elias Thorne, on the other hand, was practically invisible. For the past decade, he had been part of the building's maintenance staff, his presence marked only by the hum of his floor polisher in the late hours. He was a quiet man in his late 50s, with kind eyes and a face that held the story of a life lived far from these glass towers. The executives saw him, but they never truly noticed him. These two men existed in separate orbits within the same building, one navigating the stratosphere of power and the other walking the quiet, empty halls after everyone had gone home. Arthur Vance's world was one of numbers, projections, and ruthless efficiency. Elias Thorne's world was one of solvent schedules and the silent observation of the lives that bustled around him during the day. A life completely disconnected from corporate ambition. Imagine a chess game where the king is only aware of the other powerful pieces on the board. The queen, the rooks, the bishops. He never pays mind to the pawn, seeing it as insignificant and expendable. Yet it is the pawn that can cross the entire board and change the very nature of the game. This dynamic was about to play out, not on a checkered board, but on polished marble. The stage for their collision was an emergency board meeting. A massive international acquisition had stalled due to a critical communication breakdown with a potential partner in Shanghai. Tensions were high, Arthur's patience was thin, and he was looking for someone to blame for the costly misunderstanding. It was in this pressure cooker of a room that Elias Thorne happened to be quietly replacing a faulty light bulb. Arthur Vance was pacing, his voice sharp, as he berated his team of Ivy League-educated executives. A simple language barrier is costing us millions. In this age of global business, it's unacceptable. None of you thought to ensure we had a fluent Mandarin speaker on the call. This is incompetence. His eyes scanned the room, filled with a mix of fear and frustration, looking for a target to demonstrate his point. His gaze landed on Elias, who was carefully securing the new light fixture, trying to remain as unobtrusive as possible. A cruel idea sparked in Arthur's mind. He pointed a finger at the janitor. You've been standing there for 10 minutes. I bet you speak English, right? Tell these highly paid geniuses how simple communication is. The room went dead silent, the humiliation palpable. All eyes turned to Elias. He slowly lowered his hands, his expression unreadable. The executives shifted uncomfortably in their expensive chairs, embarrassed by their CEO's public display of condescension. They expected Elias to mumble a response, look at the floor, and retreat as quickly as possible. It was a power play, a classic Arthur Vance tactic to assert dominance by belittling someone else in the room. For a moment, that stretched into an eternity. Elias simply stood there, meeting the CEO's glare without flinching. There was no fear in his eyes, only a calm, quiet dignity. The hum of the city outside the panoramic windows was the only sound. Arthur's smirk widened, believing he had made his point about the simplicity he expected from others, using the janitor as his unwitting prop in a corporate drama. But what Arthur and everyone else in that room failed to understand was that they were not looking at a simple janitor. They were looking at a man whose life had been a rich tapestry of experiences they couldn't possibly imagine. And Arthur's condescending challenge was not an insult. It was an invitation to finally share a piece of the world he carried within him. Elias cleared his throat softly, the sound amplified by the room's tense silence. "Yes, sir, I do speak English," he began. His voice was not what they expected. It was calm, measured, and possessed a rich, articulate cadence that felt utterly out of place with their perception of him. Communication is indeed simple. It is comprehension that proves to be the far greater challenge for most people. Wouldn't you agree, Mr. Vance? The direct philosophical return stunned Arthur into a momentary silence. The response was not just fluent. It was eloquent. It carried a weight and an intelligence that immediately dismantled the CEO's condescending premise. The executives exchanged bewildered glances. This was not the timid, one-word answer they had anticipated. The power dynamic in the room had already begun to shift, subtly but undeniably, creating a new and unexpected tension. Elias continued, his gaze still locked on the CEO. The issue with your Shanghai partners isn't likely a failure of language, but a failure of context. It's about understanding not just what is being said, but why it is being said from their cultural and business perspective. He spoke with the authority of a seasoned international diplomat, his words precise and insightful, cutting directly to the heart of their multi-million-dollar problem. The room was captivated. The janitor, who moments before had been an object of ridicule, was now commanding the attention of the entire board. He wasn't just speaking, he was teaching. He was dissecting their failure with a clarity that none of their own highly paid analysts had managed to articulate. The air crackled with a new kind of energy, the shock of a paradigm being shattered before their very eyes. Arthur Vance, for the first time in a long time, was at a complete loss for words. His simple power play had backfired spectacularly. He had intended to make Elias an example of simplicity, but Elias was becoming an example of something else entirely, something far more complex and profound. But the janitor was not finished. In fact, he was only just beginning to make his point. Then, without breaking eye contact with the stunned CEO, Elias turned his body slightly to address the entire table. His demeanor changed, as did the very sound of his voice. He switched seamlessly into perfect tonal Mandarin. 如果问题在于未能理解细微的文化差异，那么任何翻译软件或服务都无法弥补这种差距。你们失去的不是词语，而是信任。 If the problem is a failure to understand cultural nuance, then no translation software or service can bridge that gap. You are not losing words. You are losing trust. A wave of pure astonishment washed over the room. The vice president of Asian markets, a man who had a rudimentary grasp of Mandarin, looked as though he had seen a ghost. His jaw hung open as he recognized the flawless accent and the sophisticated business vocabulary being used. This wasn't just conversational Mandarin. It was the language of high-stakes negotiation, spoken with absolute and effortless command. The other board members could only stare, their minds struggling to process the scene. The man they had ignored for years, the man who cleaned their offices, was now fluently explaining the nuances of their international business failure in the very language that had stumped their entire team. The sheer improbability of the moment was staggering, breaking through their hardened corporate exteriors and leaving them in a state of collective awe. Elias continued in Mandarin for a full minute, outlining the specific cultural concepts of face, mianzi, and relationships, naguanxi, that their team had likely violated. He explained how their direct Western approach would have been perceived as aggressive and disrespectful, causing their Chinese counterparts to withdraw from the deal without offering a direct explanation. He was giving them a masterclass in cross-cultural business strategy. He then paused, letting his words hang in the silent room. The linguistic performance was breathtaking, but it was the profound insight he delivered that was truly earth-shattering. He had not only demonstrated an impossible skill, but had also solved the very problem the CEO had been raging about just moments before. And with that, he prepared to take them on another journey to a different part of the world. Before anyone could recover, Elias shifted his posture again. He stood a little straighter, his expression becoming more focused and intense. He then began to speak in crisp, precise German, his tone now reflecting the language's reputation for engineering and exactitude. Und was Ihre deutschen Produktionsanlagen betrifft, so liegt die Ineffizienz nicht in der Maschinerie, sondern in der Prozesskommunikation zwischen den Schichtleitern. And regarding your German production facilities, the inefficiency is not in the machinery, but in the process communication between shift supervisors. One of the board members, the chief operating officer who had spent years overseeing their European manufacturing, visibly flinched. He understood every word. Elias was addressing a long-standing, nagging issue of production bottlenecks at their Munich plant, a problem the COO's own team had been unable to resolve for 2 quarters. And he was diagnosing it with stunning accuracy in fluent German. The absurdity of the situation deepened. This was no longer just a surprising linguistic trick. It was a display of deep, specific, and actionable business intelligence. Where could a janitor have possibly acquired this knowledge? How could he know the intricate operational details of a factory located thousands of miles away? The mystery of Elias Thorne was growing more complex and more intriguing with every sentence he uttered. He went on in German, suggesting a specific modification to the shift handover protocols, using technical jargon that would only be familiar to a seasoned operations manager. He explained that the current system created a 15-minute gap in data transfer, leading to cumulative errors in calibration. He wasn't just speaking the language. He was demonstrating a profound understanding of industrial process optimization, a skill worth a fortune in the corporate world. Having laid bare the solution to another of the company's major problems, Elias paused once more. The room was no longer just silent. It was reverent. The board members were not looking at a janitor anymore. They were looking at a consultant, a strategist, a polymath of immense and unknown proportions, who was standing before them in a simple maintenance uniform. The journey, however, was still not over. Next, his demeanor softened. A warmth entered his eyes, and his gestures became more fluid as he transitioned into beautiful melodic Spanish. He turned to the chief marketing officer, a woman who had been struggling to launch a new campaign in South America. El problema en su campaña para América Latina no es el producto, sino el mensaje. No vende un artículo, vende una aspiración, un sentimiento que debe resonar con la pasión de la cultura. The problem with your Latin American campaign is not the product, but the message. You aren't selling an item. You're selling an aspiration, a feeling that must resonate with the passion of the culture. The CMO, a native Spanish speaker from Argentina, looked at Elias with wide, appreciative eyes. He had perfectly captured the essence of a branding challenge she had been trying to explain to the board for months. His choice of words, aspiración and passion, showed a deep, intuitive grasp of the cultural psyche that her own marketing data had only hinted at. He understood the art behind the science of marketing. He continued in Spanish, his voice carrying the rhythmic quality of a seasoned orator. He suggested that their advertising was too direct, too focused on product features, a typically North American approach. He argued it needed more family, more music, more life. It needed to connect with the heart before it could appeal to the mind. He was essentially rewriting their entire marketing strategy on the spot, for free. The other executives, even those who didn't understand Spanish, could feel the shift in energy. The sharp precision of the German language had been replaced by a vibrant, expressive quality. They were witnessing a man who didn't just speak languages. He seemed to inhabit them, adopting the cultural spirit of each tongue he spoke. It was a masterful performance that transcended mere translation and entered the realm of true communication. By this point, any thought of Elias Thorne as a simple janitor had been completely obliterated. The man was a chameleon, a vessel of global cultures and profound business acumen. He had addressed major issues in Asia, Europe, and now Latin America, all within the space of a few minutes. Arthur Vance, meanwhile, remained frozen, his face a mask of disbelief as the man he tried to humiliate continued his linguistic world tour. Elias then turned his attention to a silent, thoughtful-looking man at the end of the table, the director responsible for new market development in the Middle East. Elias inclined his head respectfully and began to speak in the flowing, courteous tones of formal Arabic. يا سيدي، إن مفتاح النجاح في دبي ليس في بناء علاقات تجارية، بل في بناء علاقات شخصية قائمة على الاحترام المتبادل والضيافة. Sir, the key to success in Dubai is not in building business relationships, but in building personal relationships based on mutual respect and hospitality. The director, who had spent years trying to secure a critical partnership in the UAE, leaned forward, hanging on every word. He was one of the few who understood the language, and his expression was one of intense concentration and dawning realization. Elias was giving him the cultural key he had been missing. His team had been focusing on contracts and numbers, while Elias spoke of trust and honor, the true currencies of the region. Elias elaborated in Arabic, explaining the importance of taking time, of sharing a meal, of asking about family before ever mentioning business. He described how their aggressive timelines and immediate focus on the bottom line would be perceived as rude and disrespectful, closing doors before they were ever truly opened. His advice was not something one could learn from a business textbook. It was knowledge born of lived experience. This was perhaps the most nuanced lesson of all. It wasn't about data or logistics. It was about human connection. Elias was teaching them that in some parts of the world, business is an extension of life, not separate from it. To succeed there, a company like Vance Global would have to learn to slow down, to listen, and to value the person on the other side of the table more than the deal itself. As he finished speaking, a deep quiet settled over the room once more. He had not only navigated the complexities of Mandarin business culture, German industrial process, and Latin American marketing, but now also the subtle relationship-driven world of Middle Eastern commerce. The breadth of his knowledge was simply staggering, and the mystery of his identity deepened with each language he spoke. Fixing his gaze on the company's chief strategist, a man known for his cold, calculating approach to risk assessment, Elias switched to the powerful, resonant sounds of the Russian language. В работе с нашими восточноевропейскими партнерами нельзя показывать слабость, но и нельзя путать уверенность с агрессией. Они уважают силу, но заключают сделки на основе прагматизма, а не запугивания. In dealing with our Eastern European partners, you must not show weakness, but you must not mistake confidence for aggression. They respect strength, but they close deals based on pragmatism, not intimidation. The strategist, a man who prided himself on understanding geopolitical maneuvering, was taken aback. Elias's Russian was flawless, and his insight was surgically precise. He was describing the delicate balance required to negotiate in that region, a tightrope walk between projecting strength and demonstrating practical, mutual benefit. It was a level of nuance that had eluded their own negotiation teams, who had often been too aggressive. Elias went on, explaining in Russian that their partners in the region saw negotiations as a chess match. Every move was considered 5 steps ahead. He pointed out that Vance Global's recent offers had been too straightforward, lacking the subtlety and long-term vision that would signal they were a serious, formidable partner. They weren't just losing a deal. They were losing the entire strategic game by playing checkers. The display was becoming almost surreal. Each language unlocked a new facet of Elias's expertise, each one perfectly tailored to a specific, critical area of the company's global operations. It was as if a master key had appeared, capable of opening any door in the world. The executives were no longer just impressed. They were humbled, realizing how one-dimensional their own expertise was in comparison. He paused, letting the weight of his strategic advice settle. He had given them a new framework for their entire Eastern European strategy, a region that had remained stubbornly difficult for them to penetrate. The man in the janitor's uniform understood global power dynamics better than the man they paid a fortune to do so. And he still had one more language left to reveal. For his final demonstration, Elias turned back to Arthur Vance. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of profound respect that was also a subtle act of control. He then spoke in quiet, formal Japanese, his voice calm and deferential, yet carrying an undeniable authority. そうしてバンスさん、最終的に最も重要な教訓は謙虚さです。真の力とは自分が全てを知っているわけではないと認めることから生まれるのです。And finally, Mr. Vance, the most important lesson of all is humility. True strength comes from admitting that you do not, in fact, know everything. The message was delivered with the utmost politeness, yet it was the most direct and personal challenge of the entire presentation. He was using the cultural language of respect to deliver a powerful rebuke to the CEO's arrogance. The use of Japanese, with its deep cultural emphasis on humility and form, was a masterstroke of communication, making the critique impossible to ignore or dismiss as insubordination. The few board members who had dealings with Japan understood the gravity of the moment. In Japanese culture, such a direct statement, even when phrased politely, is incredibly potent. Elias was not merely showing off another language. He was using it as a precision tool to deliver the final, most important piece of advice to the man who ran the entire company. He was teaching the king a lesson in leadership. He finished his statement in Japanese, holding the respectful bow for a moment longer before straightening up. A profound and heavy silence descended upon the 40th floor. He had spoken in 7 languages. He had diagnosed and offered solutions for critical business problems in Asia, Europe, South America, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe. And he had ended with a lesson in humility, delivered perfectly. The linguistic and strategic tour de force was complete. Elias Thorne, the janitor, stood calmly in the center of the room, having systematically dismantled every assumption the people in that room held about power, intelligence, and worth. The ball was now back in Arthur Vance's court, but the game had been irrevocably changed. The CEO's face was pale, his expression a mixture of shock, anger, and something else, a flicker of awe. For a full minute, nobody moved, nobody spoke. The only sound was the faint, distant wail of a siren from the city streets far below. Hesabed. Board members, titans of industry, sat frozen in their leather chairs, their minds reeling. They had just witnessed something that defied all logic, a corporate miracle performed by the most overlooked man in the entire building. The silence was thick with unspoken questions. Arthur Vance slowly sank into his chair at the head of the table. The anger and arrogance had drained from his face, replaced by a look of profound confusion. He stared at Elias, not as a subordinate to be dismissed, but as an enigma to be solved. Who was this man? Where did he come from? How could so much knowledge and experience be hidden behind such a humble facade? It was the oldest member of the board, a wise man named Marcus Blackwood, who finally broke the silence. He cleared his throat, his voice quiet but firm. "Mr. Thorne," he said, the use of the formal address a clear sign of a fundamental shift. "I believe you may have just saved this company millions of dollars. Perhaps you would be so kind as to tell us how you came by this extraordinary expertise." All eyes turned back to Elias. The challenge was over, replaced by a genuine, urgent curiosity. The executives were no longer looking down on him from a position of authority. They were looking up at him, metaphorically, as students before a master. They wanted to understand the story behind the spectacle, the life that had forged such a remarkable and unexpected individual. Elias offered a small, gentle smile. The performance was over, and the time for explanation had arrived. The story of how he learned 7 languages and understood the world so deeply was not one of corporate ladders or university degrees. It was a story of a different kind of life, one of hardship, travel, and, most importantly, of listening. A story he was now ready to share. "My story is not complicated," Elias began, his voice returning to its calm, simple English. "I wasn't born into privilege. My father worked for the State Department, not as a diplomat, but as a groundskeeper at various embassies around the world. From a very young age, my playground was the world itself. My family moved every 2 years, following his assignments from one country to the next." He looked at the faces around the table. "Our first posting was Beijing in the late 1970s. I was just a boy. I didn't have friends who spoke my language, so I had to learn theirs. My first teachers were the children of the local staff, the cooks and the drivers. They taught me Mandarin in the dusty alleyways behind the embassy walls, not in a classroom. I learned it through games and shared meals." He paused, a distant look in his eyes. "That's where I first understood that language is more than words. It's the key to a person's world. By learning their tongue, I learned their way of thinking, their values, their sense of honor and family. It's why I understood your problem with the Shanghai deal. You were speaking words. You weren't speaking their language of trust." The board members listened, utterly captivated. This wasn't just an explanation. It was a lesson in empathy and cultural immersion. The picture of a young boy learning Mandarin, not for business, but for friendship, was a powerful and humbling image. It reframed his incredible skill, not as a corporate asset, but as a deeply human part of his identity, forged in a childhood few could imagine. This first chapter of his life already explained so much. It revealed the foundation of his unique perspective. He didn't learn about the world from books or reports. He learned it from the ground up, by living it. He saw the world not through the lens of a corporate executive in a glass tower, but through the eyes of the ordinary people who make the world turn. "From China, we were sent to Germany," Elias continued, his narrative moving across the globe. "It was the 1980s, a time of industrial might. I was a teenager then, and I needed to work. I got a job on the assembly line in a Munich factory that built automotive parts, not unlike the one this company owns. I spent my days with German engineers and mechanics, men who valued precision and efficiency above all. He described his time there not as a hardship, but as an education. They didn't just teach me German. They taught me their philosophy of work. I learned to see a system not as a collection of parts, but as a whole integrated process. I learned that a tiny inefficiency, a single miscommunication, could cascade into a major failure down the line. It's how I knew to ask about your shift handover protocols. The COO, the man responsible for manufacturing, simply nodded slowly, a look of deep respect on his face. Elias was describing a level of hands-on, ingrained knowledge that no MBA program could ever teach. He had learned German process optimization not in a seminar, but by tightening bolts and listening to the factory foreman argue over schematics during their lunch breaks, absorbing their worldview. After Germany, my journey took me to Spain, Elias said, a faint smile touching his lips. I was a young man then, and I worked as a tour guide in Andalusia. My job was to sell the beauty and history of the region. I learned quickly that you couldn't sell facts and dates. You had to sell a feeling, a story. You had to connect with people's emotions, their desire for romance and adventure. He looked at the chief marketing officer. That's how I learned Spanish, and that's how I learned about marketing. It is the art of telling a story that people want to be a part of. Your campaign in Latin America is just a list of features. It has no soul, no passion. It doesn't invite the customer into a story. His life was a series of immersive, practical educations in the very fields these executives specialized in. My travels didn't stop there, Elias explained, his voice steady and calm. In my late 20s, driven by a deep curiosity, I spent several years working on a merchant ship. This vessel took me through the Suez Canal and into the bustling ports of the Middle East. I worked alongside men from Egypt, Yemen, and the Emirates. In the long hours at sea, we shared stories, and we shared our languages. He described learning Arabic not from a tutor, but from the sailors who became his brothers on the open water. They taught me that a man's word is his bond, and that hospitality is a sacred duty. Business was always secondary to the human connection. A deal could only be made after trust had been firmly established. They see the world through a lens of personal honor, not corporate policy. The director for new market development listened intently, recognizing the truth in Elias's words. He had been trying to apply Western business models to an Eastern culture, a fundamental error that Elias, through his life experience, had instinctively understood. Elias had learned the unwritten rules of commerce in the places where they were born, not in a classroom thousands of miles away. Later, a different path led me to Russia, he continued. It was the post-Soviet era, a time of immense change and uncertainty. I worked as a logistics coordinator for a small import-export firm. It was a tough environment. I had to learn Russian quickly, not just the language, but the mindset. I learned to negotiate with people who were brilliant strategists, who saw every interaction as a complex game of chess. He looked directly at the company's chief strategist. You must respect their intelligence. You must be strong but fair. You must think several moves ahead and always have a contingency plan. They value a formidable opponent and a reliable partner. Your current approach is too transparent. It lacks the necessary subtlety. Again, his life had provided a masterclass in a skill others had only studied. My last home abroad was Japan, Elias concluded. I was older then, and I found work maintaining the gardens of a historic temple in Kyoto. It was a quiet, contemplative life. The head monk took an interest in me and began to teach me. He taught me the language, but more importantly, he taught me about the philosophy of wabi-sabi, finding beauty in imperfection, and the importance of humility. He recounted his years there, surrounded by ancient traditions of discipline and respect. I learned that in their culture, the loudest voice in the room is often the weakest. True strength is demonstrated through quiet competence, through deference, and through the respect you show to others, regardless of their station. It is about the harmony of the group, not the ego of the individual. His eyes finally settled back on Arthur Vance, the CEO. "What I learned in that garden, Mr. Vance, is that a person's worth is not determined by their title or the floor their office is on. Every person, from the CEO to the janitor, has a role to play in the harmony of the whole. And the wisest leaders are those who are humble enough to listen to everyone." The story was complete. It was a breathtaking odyssey, a life of quiet observation and deep immersion in the cultures of the world. Elias Thorne was not a janitor who happened to know languages. He was a global citizen, a self-made scholar of humanity who had chosen a quiet life. His current job was not a reflection of his limitations, but a choice that allowed him peace and anonymity. The boardroom was transformed. The tension and anger were gone, replaced by a profound sense of humility and wonder. The executives now understood. They were in the presence of a man whose life experience represented an invaluable corporate asset, an asset they had overlooked every single day. If you've ever had an experience where you've misjudged someone's abilities, we'd be moved to hear your story in the comments below. Arthur Vance sat motionless for a long time after Elias finished speaking. The silence in the room was no longer tense or awkward. It was reflective. The CEO, a man known for his quick decisions and sharp tongue, seemed to be processing not just the story, but its implications for his own life and leadership style. He slowly lifted his head, and for the first time, the executives saw not a boss, but a man humbled. "Mr. Thorne," Arthur began, his voice uncharacteristically quiet and stripped of its usual arrogance. "I owe you an apology. My behavior was inexcusable." The admission sent another shockwave through the room. Arthur Vance did not apologize, ever. What I mistook for simplicity was, in fact, a depth of character and experience I can barely comprehend. I was wrong. Utterly and completely wrong. He stood up, not as an assertion of power, but as a gesture of respect. He walked around the long mahogany table until he stood directly in front of Elias. The other board members watched, holding their breath. This was a moment of reckoning, a crossroads for the man who had built the company and for the company itself. The future of Vance Global was being decided in this single human interaction. Arthur extended his hand. "I have a proposal for you," he said, his voice firm, but now filled with a newfound respect. "Your current position, it is a waste of your talent. I don't know what your life goals are, but if you are willing, I would like to create a new position for you at this company. Director of Global Strategy and Cultural Relations. You would report directly to me." The offer hung in the air, as stunning as the multilingual display that had preceded it. It was an unprecedented move, a complete shattering of corporate protocol. A janitor being offered a senior executive position, created on the spot, with a direct line to the CEO. It was a testament to the profound impact Elias Thorne had made in just under 15 minutes. Elias looked at the CEO's outstretched hand, then at the faces of the board members around the table. They were all looking at him with a mixture of hope and anticipation. The offer was more than just a job. It was a validation of his entire life, a chance to step out of the shadows and into the world of power and influence he had always observed from a distance. He gently shook his head, a small, sad smile on his face. He did not take Arthur's hand. "Thank you, Mr. Vance. It is a generous offer, and I am truly honored by your apology and your respect," Elias said softly. "But I must respectfully decline." A collective quiet gasp went through the room. No one declines an offer like that. It was unthinkable. Arthur Vance looked genuinely confused, his hand still suspended in the air. "Decline? But why?" "This is the opportunity of a lifetime. You could shape the future of this company. You could travel. You could have anything you want. We need your wisdom." "I need your wisdom," he admitted, the last part almost a whisper. A confession of his own limitations. "I have already had the opportunity of a lifetime," Elias replied, his voice filled with a calm certainty. "I have lived in a dozen countries. I have learned from the rich and the poor, the powerful and the humble. My life has been full. I took this job, Mr. Vance, not because I had no other options, but because I wanted peace. I wanted a quiet place to work while I write. Right? The CMO asked, intrigued. Yes, Elias confirmed. I am writing a book about my travels, about the lessons I've learned from the people of the world. It is the work of my heart, and it requires solitude and observation. This job, he gestured to the quiet hall outside the boardroom, gives me that. Your world, he gestured to the mahogany table, is too loud for the work I must do now. Arthur Vance slowly lowered his hand, a look of profound understanding dawning on his face. He finally saw the complete picture. Elias wasn't rejecting the offer out of pride or spite. He was choosing a different definition of success, one that had nothing to do with titles, corner offices, or stock options. His wealth was his experience, and his ambition was to share it in his own way, on his own terms. I see, Arthur said quietly. He walked back to his seat at the head of the table, his mind working furiously. He was a deal-maker, a problem solver. If Elias would not accept the position, there had to be another way. He could not let this incredible resource simply walk away and continue polishing floors. The company needed his guidance, now more than ever. After a moment of thought, Arthur looked up, a new kind of energy in his eyes. All right, Mr. Thorne, you win. You keep your peace. You keep your job. But I have a counteroffer. Everyone leaned in, curious to see what the CEO would propose next. How about you become a consultant to this board? On your terms, he elaborated. You continue your current duties as you wish. No one will bother you. But once a week, for 1 hour, you will meet with me and this board. We will present you with our most difficult global challenges, and you will provide your insights. We will pay you a handsome consultant's fee for that 1 hour, a fee befitting your expertise. The rest of your time is your own. Elias considered the proposal. It was an elegant solution, one that respected his desire for a quiet life, while still allowing the company to benefit from his wisdom. It offered him the best of both worlds, the solitude to write his book and the opportunity to apply his life's lessons in a meaningful way. It was a bridge between his world and theirs. After a moment of thoughtful silence, Elias Thorne nodded his head. Mr. Vance, that is an arrangement I can agree to, he said. A wave of relief washed over the boardroom. Arthur Vance smiled, a genuine smile this time, one of gratitude and not triumph. A deal had been struck, one that was far more valuable than the stalled acquisition that had started the entire meeting. The oldest board member, Marcus Blackwood, spoke up. I think this marks a new chapter for Vance Global. A better one. His words resonated with everyone in the room. The events of the past hour had been a profound wake-up call, a catalyst for a much-needed cultural shift within the company. They had been reminded that their greatest assets weren't on the balance sheet. The meeting that had started with anger and frustration concluded with a sense of hope and renewed purpose. The immediate problems, the deals in Shanghai, the factory in Munich, now seemed solvable thanks to the clear path Elias had laid out for them. But the long-term solution was even more significant. They now had a secret weapon, a wise counsel in the most unexpected of places. As the board members began to gather their papers, they approached Elias one by one. They shook his hand, not with the condescension of a superior, but with the genuine respect of a colleague. They thanked him for his insights and expressed their anticipation for their future consultations. The janitor had become the most esteemed person in the room, his status transformed by the simple act of speaking his truth. Arthur Vance was the last to speak with him. Elias, he said, using his first name for the first time. Thank you. You taught me a valuable lesson today, one I should have learned a long time ago. Elias simply nodded, a quiet understanding passing between the two men. They came from vastly different worlds, but they had found common ground in a shared goal, to make things better. The following week, the atmosphere in the boardroom was entirely different. The usual tension was replaced by a quiet sense of anticipation. At precisely 2 p.m., Elias Thorne entered, not in his maintenance uniform, but in a simple, clean press suit that he wore with an understated dignity. He took a seat that had been left for him at the table, not at the head but among the other members, as a peer. Arthur Vance started the meeting. "Welcome, Elias. As agreed, we'd like to present our first challenge. We are attempting to enter the Brazilian market with a new line of home technology, but our focus groups are showing a complete lack of interest. Our market analysis suggests it should be a success. We don't understand the disconnect." He gestured to the head of marketing to elaborate. The CMO presented the data, charts, graphs, and survey results, all pointing to a theoretically perfect product-market fit. Yet in practice, the response from Brazilian consumers was lukewarm at best. They had spent millions on research, but they were missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. They all turned to Elias, their new consultant, waiting for his perspective on the complex situation. Elias listened patiently, absorbing all the information without taking a single note. When the presentation was over, he asked a simple question. "Your technology is designed for individual convenience, correct? It automates tasks for a single person. Your marketing highlights efficiency and time saving for the individual user." The CMO confirmed that this was indeed the core of their entire campaign. "Therein lies your problem," Elias stated calmly. "In much of Brazilian culture, the home is not a place of individual efficiency, but of communal life. Family, celebration. Your product, by its very nature, isolates people. You are not selling convenience. You are perceived as selling loneliness." The simple, profound insight struck the room like a bolt of lightning, revealing their cultural blind spot. "You must change the story you are telling," Elias continued, building on his initial insight. "Stop marketing the device as a personal assistant and start marketing it as a tool that brings families together. Show how it can handle the mundane. Chores, freeing up more time for a family to enjoy a meal, listen to music, or share stories together. The value is not the time saved, it's what you do with that time." He then switched to a fluid, warm Portuguese, the language of Brazil, to add color to his point. "A tecnologia deve servir a alegria da vida, não substituí-la." Technology should serve the joy of life, not replace it. He explained how they could rebrand the entire campaign around the concept of mais tempo para o que importa, more time for what matters, using imagery of families and friends, not isolated individuals. The marketing team began scribbling notes furiously. In 5 minutes, Elias had not only diagnosed their core problem, but had also handed them a complete, culturally resonant marketing strategy. It was a solution that was invisible in their data, but was plainly obvious to someone who understood the soul of the culture. He was teaching them to see beyond the numbers and to connect with human beings. This first consultation set the tone for all the ones that followed. Week after week, Elias would listen to their most intractable problems and offer solutions that were breathtaking in their simplicity and effectiveness. He guided them through a complex labor negotiation in France by explaining the deep cultural importance of workers' rights. He helped them redesign a product for the Indian market by emphasizing its value to a multi-generational household. Elias Thorne became the company's moral and cultural compass. His influence began to permeate every department. The company's communication became more empathetic, its products more culturally aware, and its strategies more human-centric. Vance, global, once known for its ruthless aggression, was slowly transforming into a smarter, wiser, and more respected global entity. Arthur Vance himself was undergoing the most significant change of all. The change in Arthur Vance was the most remarkable outcome of Elias's presence. The CEO, who once ruled by fear, began to learn to lead with respect. He started holding listening sessions with employees from all levels of the company, from the mailroom to the executive suite. He began to ask questions instead of just giving orders, genuinely seeking to understand the perspectives of his people. He and Elias developed an unlikely friendship. After their weekly board consultations, the two would often remain behind, sharing a cup of coffee. Arthur would ask Elias about his travels, listening with genuine fascination to stories of the world beyond his corporate bubble. Elias, in turn, would listen to Arthur's challenges, offering not just business advice, but wisdom about leadership and life. One afternoon, Arthur confided in Elias. "For 30 years, I thought building this company was about being the smartest, toughest guy in the room. I built an empire, but I never built a community. I had employees, but no followers. You showed me that true strength isn't about shouting the loudest. It's about being humble enough to listen to the quietest voice." Elias's influence was like a stone dropped in a still pond, with ripples spreading throughout the entire organization. The corporate culture, once toxic and driven by internal competition, began to shift. Collaboration increased, employee morale improved, and innovative ideas started to bubble up from the most unexpected corners of the company. People felt valued, and in return, they gave their best. The ultimate proof of this transformation came a year later. Vance Global won the prestigious Most Ethical Global Employer Award, an honor that would have been unthinkable under the old regime. During his acceptance speech, Arthur Vance didn't take the credit. Instead, he told the story of a janitor who taught him and his entire board the true meaning of communication and respect. While Vance Global was undergoing its transformation, Elias Thorne continued his quiet life. He performed his maintenance duties with the same care and dignity as always. The other employees now greeted him with a new level of respect, many of them having heard the legendary story of that first board meeting. He always returned their greetings with a warm, humble smile, remaining unchanged by his new, influential role. In the quiet hours of the night, after the offices were empty and the building was his, he would sit in his small, clean break room and write. Page by page, his life's work took shape. He poured his memories, his experiences, and the wisdom he had gathered from across the globe onto the paper. It was a book not about business, but about humanity, connection, and understanding. Finally, after 2 years of consulting for the board and writing in the peaceful solitude of the night, he finished his manuscript. He titled it The Janitor's Atlas, Finding the World in Unexpected Places. It was a collection of stories and lessons, a testament to a life of observation, and a guide to seeing the world through other people's eyes. A truly unique and powerful work. He presented the first copy to Arthur Vance. The CEO was deeply moved, holding the manuscript as if it were a precious artifact. "Elias," he said, his voice thick with emotion, This is your true legacy. The work you've done for this company has been transformative, but this book will touch the world. We have to get it published." Arthur, using his formidable network of contacts, personally championed the book. He sent it to one of the most respected publishing houses in New York with a personal letter explaining the extraordinary story behind its author. The publishers were captivated not only by the manuscript's profound wisdom, but also by the incredible, authentic story of the man who had written it. The Janitor's Atlas was published to immediate and universal acclaim. Critics praised its profound insights, its beautiful prose, and its gentle, humane wisdom. It was hailed as a must-read for anyone living or working in our interconnected world. The book struck a deep chord with readers who were tired of division and hungry for stories about empathy and shared humanity. It was a message the world desperately needed. The book became an unexpected international bestseller. It was translated into dozens of languages, finding a massive audience in the very countries Elias had once called home. People from all walks of life, from students to CEOs, from travelers to homebodies, found something resonant in its pages. The story of the janitor who understood the world became a modern-day fable. Elias Thorne, The man who had sought a life of quiet anonymity was suddenly famous. He was invited to speak at universities, at global forums, and at the United Nations. He always accepted with humility, sharing his story not as a celebrity, but as an ordinary man who had lived an extraordinary life. His message was always the same: listen, learn, and respect the humanity in everyone you meet. Despite his fame, he remained grounded. He politely declined most of the lucrative offers that came his way. He continued to live in his modest apartment and found his greatest joy not in the accolades, but in the letters he received from readers around the world. They shared how his book had changed their perspective, helped them connect with others, and inspired them to look for the hidden wisdom in their own lives. Vance Global celebrated his success with immense pride. The company bought thousands of copies for its employees and made The Janitor's Atlas required reading for its leadership development program. Elias's philosophy was now officially woven into the DNA of the corporation. He had helped to save and reshape from the inside out, proving that one quiet voice could indeed change everything. One day, 3 years after that fateful first encounter, Elias requested a special meeting with the board. He entered the familiar room, where he was now greeted as a friend and a mentor. He looked older, but his eyes were as clear and wise as ever. He carried with him a sense of peace and finality. The board members sensed that this meeting would be different. "My friends," he began, "our journey together has been a remarkable one. I've watched this company and all of you grow in ways I never thought possible. You have learned to lead with wisdom and empathy. The work we set out to do is complete." He paused, letting the words settle in the quiet room, where their shared history was so palpable. "My book has found its way into the world," he continued. "It is doing the work I hoped it would, and now my own journey is calling me to a new chapter. It is time for me to retire." He announced his decision not with sadness, but with a serene sense of accomplishment. He had fulfilled his purpose at Vance Global, and his life's work was now complete. Arthur Vance and the other board members were saddened, but they understood. They knew Elias was not a man to be tied down to one place forever. His spirit was that of a traveler, a seeker. They expressed their profound gratitude for everything he had done, acknowledging that his contributions were immeasurable and would guide the company for decades to come. His legacy was secure. For his final act as a consultant, Elias didn't offer a solution to a business problem. Instead, he left them with a piece of wisdom. "Never forget the lesson of that first day," he said. "The greatest ideas, the most valuable insights can come from anywhere and anyone. Your greatest strength will always be your willingness to listen." Elias Thorne's departure left a void, but not one of despair. Instead, it left a legacy that had become the company's guiding principle. The Elias principle, as it came to be known internally, was simple. Everyone has a story, and every story has value. This philosophy was integrated into their hiring practices, their management training, and their daily operations. They became a company that listened. Arthur Vance, fully transformed by his friendship with Elias, dedicated the rest of his career to promoting this new form of leadership. He became a leading voice in the business world for ethical practices and human-centric corporate cultures. He always credited his change of heart to a janitor who knew 7 languages and 1,000 worlds, ensuring Elias's story was never forgotten within the company walls. The company continued to thrive, its success built on a foundation of cultural awareness and genuine human connection that gave it a unique advantage in the global marketplace. The boardroom on the 40th floor was no longer a place of fear and intimidation, but one of respectful debate and collaborative problem-solving. The mahogany table was now a round table in spirit, where every voice mattered. The story of Elias Thorne became a cornerstone of Vance Global's identity, a source of pride for its employees. New hires were told the story on their first day to illustrate the company's core values. It served as a constant reminder that titles and positions are temporary, but character, wisdom, and respect are timeless. The janitor's presence was still felt in the halls, long after he had gone, and so the quiet man who had once been invisible left an indelible mark. His legacy was not in a building or a title, but in a profound shift in perspective. He taught an entire corporation that the world is not just a market to be conquered, but a tapestry of human experiences to be understood and respected, a lesson that proved to be the most valuable asset of all. Years later, Arthur Vance, now retired, was traveling through a small, sun-drenched village in southern Spain. He was there on a personal journey, seeking the kind of peace and connection that Elias had so often described. He had sold his company, entrusting it to a new generation of leaders who embodied the principles they had learned together. His life was simpler now and much richer for it. As he walked through a bustling local market, he heard a familiar laugh. He turned and saw a group of children gathered around an old man who was telling them a story with animated gestures. The man was older, his hair completely white, but his eyes held the same kind of spark and deep wisdom. It was Elias Thorne, looking completely at home, surrounded by a new audience. Arthur approached slowly, not wanting to interrupt the magical scene. Elias was telling the children a folk tale, switching effortlessly between Spanish for the local children and English for a few young tourists who had gathered. He was doing what he had always done, bridging worlds, connecting people through the simple, powerful act of sharing a story, finding common ground between them. When the story was over and the children had scattered, Elias looked up and saw Arthur standing there. A wide, warm smile spread across his face. There was no surprise, only a look of peaceful recognition, as if it were the most natural thing in the world for their paths to cross again in such a distant and unlikely place. "Far from the corporate world, Arthur," Elias said, his voice as calm as ever. "I wondered when you might find your way here." It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. The two old friends, the former CEO and the former janitor, stood for a moment in the warm Spanish sun. Two men whose lives had been forever changed by a single, unexpected encounter in a boardroom half a world away. "What are you doing here, Elias?" Arthur asked, though he already knew the answer. He was living. He was doing what he had always done, but without the need for the quiet solitude of the night. He was out in the world, once again immersing himself in the flow of life, collecting new stories and sharing the ones he already knew with anyone who would listen. "I am home," Elias replied simply. "I have many homes, and this is one of them. I'm learning from the children and perhaps teaching them a little in return." His definition of home was not a place, but a state of being, a state of connection and learning. He had found his final chapter, not in a book, but in the living, breathing world around him. They spent the rest of the afternoon together, sitting at a small outdoor cafe, talking for hours. They didn't talk about business or stock prices. They talked about life, about family, about the simple joys of a good meal and a good conversation. Arthur told Elias about the continued success of the company and the legacy of his teachings. Elias listened, nodding with quiet satisfaction. Arthur realized that Elias had never truly been a janitor, a consultant, or a best-selling author. Those were just roles he had played, costumes he had worn. At his core, Elias Thorne was a teacher. His classroom was the world, and his subject was humanity. He had taught the board of Vance Global. He had taught the world through his book, and now he was teaching a new generation of children in a sleepy Spanish village. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the plaza, Arthur felt a profound sense of peace. He understood now that Elias's decision to decline the executive position wasn't a rejection of success, but an embrace of a different, more meaningful kind. Elias had what all the money in the world couldn't buy, a life rich in purpose and contentment. Before they parted ways, Arthur asked one final question. "Elias, of all the lessons you've learned and taught, which one is the most important?" He felt a need to distill the profound wisdom of his friend into a single, portable truth he could carry with him for the rest of his days. A final piece of advice. Elias thought for a moment, his gaze distant. "The most important lesson," he said finally, "is that the world is a library, and every person you meet is a book. Most of us walk through life only reading the titles, the CEO, the janitor, the doctor, the baker. We judge the book by its cover. But if you take the time to open the book, to read the pages, you will find a universe of stories and wisdom you never knew existed." He smiled at his friend. "Never stop being curious enough to open the book. That is all." The simple analogy was perfect. It was the distillation of his entire life, of his entire philosophy. It was the key to understanding, the key to empathy, and the key to a richer and more meaningful existence. It was the final and most enduring lesson. Arthur Vance nodded, the words sinking deep into his soul. He thanked his friend, and they embraced, a gesture of profound respect and affection, between two men from different worlds who had found a common humanity. As Arthur walked away, he looked back one last time to see Elias already engaged in a new conversation with the cafe owner, another book he was joyfully opening. Arthur returned home a changed man again. His encounter with Elias had not been a confrontation or a consultation, but a peaceful affirmation of the path he was now on. He dedicated his retirement to funding literacy programs and cultural exchange scholarships, helping young people learn to open the book of other people and other cultures, continuing Elias's work in his own way. The story of Elias Thorne and Arthur Vance is a powerful illustration of how a single moment can change everything. It began with an act of arrogance in a high-stakes environment, but evolved into a journey of discovery, humility, and profound transformation. It reminds us that potential for greatness and wisdom exists everywhere, often in the places we are least conditioned to look, requiring only an open mind to be seen. This narrative isn't just about a man who knew many languages. It's a deeper exploration of what it means to truly communicate. Elias's real gift was not his multilingualism, but his profound empathy, his ability to see the world from another's perspective. For those interested in developing this skill, resources from organizations like Cultural Vistas or Amnesty International offer valuable insights into global understanding. Real, meaningful change, like the one at Vance Global, is never instantaneous. It begins with a single event, a catalyst, but it is built through consistent effort and a genuine commitment to new principles. The results, a healthier culture, a more successful business, and more fulfilled individuals, unfolded over years, rooted in the initial decision to listen and to respect the dignity of every single individual. What is the most profound lesson you have learned from an unexpected person or situation in your own life? Sharing these experiences helps us all appreciate the hidden wisdom that surrounds us. We invite you to share your story in the comments below, to continue this conversation about the extraordinary potential found in the everyday, and how it can change our perspectives. Ultimately, this story serves as a reminder to remain curious, to challenge our own assumptions, and to approach every person we meet with the respect due to a life filled with unique experiences. The most valuable knowledge is often not found in boardrooms or textbooks, but in the quiet, untold stories of the people around us, waiting for someone to finally and respectfully ask.